So welcome everybody. I'm going to be letting other people in as we go along. My name is IshayGovender and I am a journalist. I focus on culture. I'm very interested in issues relating to social justice and the voices of the marginalized. I am here representing SAPOC at the table. We are a network that fosters connections between people of color in the greater food and beverage industry in South Africa and across Africa. I'm very, very glad to have you here with us today, and I'm going to be letting more people in as they join. Can I just ask, if you're not a panelist, to please put yourself on mute. Thank you. So we are here today to discuss diversity in the South African wine industry, the challenges, the lessons, and the way forward. We have a lot to unpack, and I'm really looking forward to having the panelists introduce themselves to you. From time to time, you're going to be seeing me fiddle on the screen, and that's because I'm letting people in. For those who are just joining, can I just ask, please keep your microphone on mute, and feel free to add your feedback in the chat box. So joining us today, Natasha, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Natasha Boks. So currently, yes, my position in industry, I have my own business, NBW Consulting, but previously I used to work for the style, close to 10 years of winemaking. Yeah, and that is how my connection is with wine.
Great, thank you. Tuanni.
Hi, everyone. Hi, I have some of my really great friends in the wine industry on the call. So hello, everyone. My name is Tuanni Price. I am in South Africa. I'm originally from Los Angeles, California, and I have a wine tasting and tour, a lifestyle wine company.
Thank you. Nomonde?
Hi, everybody. Nomonde Kubheka. What did you ask again? Okay. How I'm affiliated to wine. I used to make wine in a previous life. I worked in the cellar for 10 years. Currently, I'm an independent facilitator, and I do some work for the Pinotage Youth Development Academy in Stellenbosch, and also do some work, knowledge transfer, cellar assistance.
Great,
Yeah.
Thank you. So for those of you who have just joined us, we are discussing diversity in the South African wine industry. We're looking at some of the challenges, some of the lessons, and potentially a way forward. We don't have answers. I don't expect us to have all the answers, but I'm pretty sure we're going to come away with this with a lot more questions. So welcome again to those who are joining. Please put your microphone on mute if you are not a panelist. So I thought we'd start this afternoon out with some statistics. According to Wines of South Africa, WOSA, we've had exports reaching 320 million liters in 2019. There are more than 2,873 farmers who cultivate some 92,067 hectares of land. We've got 300,000 people who are employed directly or indirectly in the wine industry. And the annual harvest in 2019 amounted to 973.6 million liters. We also have about 2,500 wine producing farms in South Africa. 3% of these are Black owned. I'm interested to know, Natasha, in your opinion, what would a diverse wine industry look like?
So I think, obviously coming from more the production side and manufacturing side, and I think the Nomonde as well, I think there's a lot of things when I have to speak about the value chain in terms of wine industry. I do believe there's a lot of where I would see within the value chain we could still do so much more diversity. And for me, it would look like where everyone has a place within that whole value chain, and actually are people that is in influential or decision-making power, and they actually have inputs within that value chain. Because currently I do believe there's a lot of those, if I look at the links of the value chain, where there is not enough representation and also not enough influencing or decision-making power within people of color.
Natasha, if we could just elaborate there, what do we mean by the value chain for those perhaps who are not very well acquainted with the wine industry?
So if you look at, for instance, we look at obviously production, which is one side. If we have to look at the value chain, and that is literally from the vines up until where you get the finished product. And then from there onwards, I usually say it goes into distribution channels, and then you obviously enter into markets. So if you look at most of the brands currently within South Africa, you have to ask yourself, how many of these people are either owning it, are either people that really are, to be honest, showing profitability within those spaces, with all the respect, and also asking yourself, is it really a place in terms, even in distribution markets? Because I do believe, I'm a person that believes you start with the market and you work back, but how many of them actually have access to market, have a distribution channel to do so? Because if you produce is one thing, but who's going to actually at the end, how are you going to get your product to the market? So that is why I'm saying I think it's critical to look at it in a way where we are in such a way understanding that the value chain needs to be owned, but also needs to be owned by people of obviously diversity in terms of color, but at the end of the day, people that actually owns it in terms of making money from it. And that's how you create wealth in a value chain like that.
Thank you. May I just ask, if you're not a panelist, please keep your microphone on mute. Thank you very much. Nomonde, would you like to comment on what a diverse wine industry will look like for you?
Well, okay. Natasha's already on the value chain, and I come from a wine production background. You see people of color who are top management, the people who actually make decisions. If you look, I experience thus far in the industry, look at people who make decisions in the cellar. Most of the time it's not been people of color. And to actually have people who are at the top lift else at the bottom, if I can put it like that. So more diverse in terms of also workers, cellar assistants in the cellar who become eventually winemakers. So to actually have that type of access for people. So education, upliftment, empowerment, just seeing more people, color people who make decisions at the top. If you think, or when I think about it, I don't know many people who are in production, sort of cellar masters who are women or who are black. So that's actually be awesome one day, my lifetime, hopefully.
So we're going to get into some detail a little later about what you do with the academy, so thank you for that. I also know you had a reaction when I gave you the statistic earlier today that in terms of how many wine farms are actually owned by Black folks, and we discovered it's 3%, and you were surprised.
I think not so much, probably not so much surprised, but to actually have a number that says out of 100, there's only 3. After all this time, there's still very little ownership. That is actually quite scary, if I can put it that way. So I think the wine industry in terms of diversity has come a long way over the years, some way. But the stretch is still much longer.
Yeah. So Tuanni, with your dual viewpoint, because you do what you do in LA, and I'm not sure if you also focus in other areas in the US, and then you spend a portion of your time doing that same or similar work in South Africa. To you, what does a diverse wine industry look like? And you can feel free to comment on from both sides of the world.
So for me, it looks like a distribution of wealth and opportunity, right? And mostly opportunity. So that's opportunity through education and through positions in management and distribution of wealth, right? So a lot of times when Black people are in these positions like winemakers, sommeliers, whatever the position is, they might not be paid as much as their white counterparts, right? And so how can we ever see an equal or a fair landscape if we're not starting off with paying people properly, right? Because we can't afford education if we're not being paid properly. We can't afford advancement in our career opportunities. So I think to get to a diverse landscape, first you have to start off with ensuring that the distribution of wealth is fair and people are compensated for the things that they do in this industry. And I agree with Natasha. We have this conversation all the time, and this is pretty much an internal build on making sure that we as Black people have diversity by focusing on different parts of the value chain. So like what I notice in the industry, there's a lot of Black people who want to just have a wine label, right? But who wants to actually have a distribution company? Who actually wants to have a seller? So as Black people helping ourselves, we have to focus on different parts of the industry than just having a wine brand. So,
yeah. I recall having a part of this conversation a couple of years ago for an article that I ultimately didn't go through with because I wasn't satisfied with the, with what was coming out and who was speaking on behalf of whom. But we will get to that a little later. And a lot of it had to do with ownership in the distribution chain. So on the subject of facts and figures, this morning I spoke to Phil Bowes, who's the Enterprise Development Manager at Winpro. And he told me that they are not in the position to comment on these issues in general. And what I gathered is that he says that he's not allowed or in a position to comment critically of the industry. But he did say that I should quote his quote in Jancis Robinson's latest piece. So I will. South Africans have learned from the mistakes of the past. Sustainable development practices are now being implemented with significant support from the industry for Black-owned enterprises. Not only do people of color have access to private sector and government-sponsored cash grants for business development, but also to free technical knowledge via industry bodies such as Winpro, WineTech, and the Wine Industry Transformation Unit, who I also tried to get in touch with earlier and landed up with being connected to Phil. More recently established BEE models seem to work better than early attempts did. Revisions to BEE legislation have promoted inclusivity with less room for non-viable propositions. Okay, so quite a bit for us to absorb and unpack there. But I would like you to comment on opportunity and development, both in your personal experience and the work that you do. And I'm wondering, Nomonde, would you be willing to start?
Around development
and opportunity.
Cool. In the work that I for the Pinotage Youth Development Academy, the objective there is to actually have young South Africans come into the industry. So the idea there is to actually give them technical skills, give them personal development, so that by the time they leave the academy after a year, they're well developed, they're meaningful employment within the wine industry. So that's actually been very important because the academy is I think 7 years old now. Having a pool of people, of young people, of talent, go into industry, and some of them at the tasting room, wine ambassadors, some of them have gone overseas. So that's been a opportunity to actually transform the industry, but from a different angle. So using, I suppose, education as a bridge, as access, because most of those young people don't have the finances for tertiary education. So that's been an opportunity to actually for them to find employment within the wine industry. As for myself,
I'm going to interrupt you there, sorry. Could I just ask, if you've joined the chat, please place and you're not a panelist, please put yourself on mute. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt, Nomonde. Please continue.
That's fine. So in terms of the opportunity and maybe how I actually ended up where I am today, a bursary to study. So I knew for me, education has always been sort of the gateway into getting into places. I decided that's what would work for me. So I'm originally from Soweto in Johannesburg, so didn't know anything about the wine industry to begin with, nothing. But through actually having an education, I studied Stellenbosch University, then worked for KWV for 10 years. And for me, working there, which is awesome, learned a lot, observed a lot, but I knew that it was not my, I would like to call it, it's not my calling. And what I've also observed there is that as sort of people who work in the cellar, general workers, didn't have I mean, they had aspirations, they wanted things, but formal education was, so I'd find myself actually spending time with them and to help them out so that they could understand, find that's what I enjoyed. So I think there's opportunity everywhere. So sometimes it doesn't have to be formal education where you're training to go to some course or whatever. In-house, I'm talking about production specifically, in-house where maybe the winemaker or the supervisor makes sure that this of the team doesn't lag behind, have any sort of maybe metric, maybe they use whatever opportunity they can to take people on to build that team. And for me, that's what opportunity and that's what helps help the person more, I suppose.
Okay. Nomonde, I've just put your video off because I've received some feedback that it's breaking up. And so just bear with me with that. And Natasha, in terms of everything that Phil says here in this piece about, you know, he brings up the support, the fact that things have changed drastically, there are opportunities for development, and there's a lot, certainly, I mean, it would make sense that there's a hell of a lot more since the 90s. Would you like to comment on that, please? Yeah.
So in terms of when you look at, again, yes, there's opportunities, yes, it's education. I'm also one of the people who also assist wine training SA with obviously giving lecturing some of the winemaking classes at Elsenburg. And at this stage, like I said, always there's more opportunities. Education is key. And I agree with Nomonde because this is where it all starts, is when you are more informed. But I do believe beyond just the normal winemaking, I think, again, I've worked at Nederburg where there's people that have been 20 years in the industry, in the cellar working. They've done all the possible projects, programs you can think of, but they've never been promoted into the skill set that they've required. And that is one of the things, and I agree with what you said, Tuanni, about wealth. That is when it comes to how are you distributing the wealth within that. So I'm not saying there is not opportunities. The question is, what type of opportunities are there and how is it then linked to that person, either enhancing their life and the way they see in terms of monetary value, because it has an effect on the person. If you look at a company who I've worked in, you look at someone that has to retire 10 years from now, the fact that he's on a certain grade, maybe 3 to 4, it's a huge gap in terms of the wealth and also how he looks after his family in terms of the benefits he gets. And I believe at this stage, yes, education is key, but the question is, now I have the skills, how am I actually creating a platform? I'm always saying platforms need to be created for people if they have the skill set, if they have the right mindset. And sometimes not even I've worked with guys, sometimes the attitude for me is the most important thing. Even young guys coming into and girls coming into the industry, that is key. And yes, you can do on-the-job training, but the reality is there enough opportunities set out for people in order to sit into those positions, to come into those positions? Sometimes you would see maybe that person is qualified, but then someone else comes out of the blue and they get the job. And then it's again about who do you know, who are you exposed to, who's the person in the industry that can open the doors for you. And unfortunately, with all due respect, as people of color, we don't have the lineage in that way. Sorry to say lineage, in order for us to say that I know someone or the channel is in such a way that I had a forefather or someone in the industry that can open that door for me. But maybe, yes, I have the skill set, but who's going to give me the platform to actually operate with that skill set that I'm having? Because I do believe that is also where this whole thing comes back into when you look at a lot of times young kids getting, I've spoken now 2 weeks ago with a group of young ladies at University of Stellenbosch, because that's where I studied, and had a session on the anxiety, right, third year. Are they gonna get a job? Who do they need to talk to? Because they don't know people. They might know me, they might know Tuanni Nomonde, but who else? And the reality is, we as an industry gonna have to open the doors more for people to come in and invite. I always say diversity is when you invite me into the room, but the moment you actually ask me for a dance and to participate at the table or at the venue where I'm at, that's when you actually are telling me, but I belong here. Don't just invite me in. Ask me for the dance, ask me to participate, ask me to be someone at the table that has a voice, hear me when I speak. I think that is the reality that we're sitting with within the wine industry. And so many young kids currently are struggling, even if they're educated, but because they don't see how should they fit in and how can they fit in within this industry.
Natasha, in summary, would you say where we are right now, taking everything into account, the historical factors, and then also the historical factors post-1990, are you happy with where we are?
Look, I've come in the industry in 2008, and if I have to look at where we are at now, I do believe we could have gone so much more further. But I'm very, Tuanni knows me, when it comes to talking about diversity, I always say it's important that everyone around the table should have an input in it. So no, at this stage, and I'm not saying it's only the wine industry, I'm talking about policy-making people, I'm talking about government, I'm talking about private sector. It's so many people around this table who's maybe not being, and again, when people say stuff in social media, those are the type of things I always ask, do you really understand what the value chain needs in terms of the winemaking value chain or the wine value chain before you make that comment? Because there's a lot of things, and that's why sometimes even the youth, they need to be part of the dialogue of policy. They need to be part of the structure of how do you get funding. But most of the people who make these decisions are people that is not our age group, that is people that has been there for years. And unfortunately, we don't have the voice again in that instance. So no, I do believe we could have gone further if we were invited in, but also asked to have a voice in the room.
Yes. So there are a couple of things that you have brought up now that I know we're going to get into a little later. But Tuanni, I'd also love to know your opinion. So you've built your, well, not on this one particularly, but you've built your business by working alongside and amplifying Black businesses and wine professionals. You run the social media for the Black Cellar Club. What has been your experience of working in wine in South Africa over the years?
Well, I have to be honest. First of all, I love the South African wine culture. I love the South African wine industry. It's the only place in the world where I can find people who are working at all parts of the value chain that look like me. Now, albeit there might not be as many as we would like, but I do see that. So I love working in this industry, and I've been treated very personally. I have been treated for the most part fairly and professionally by our non-Black allies, and I'm grateful for that. So, I mean, it's kind of hard for me because I can't really say anything too negative about the South African wine industry, but I can say that I would like to see more people being paid better. You know what I mean? I would like to see the distribution of wealth spread across the board. And I mean, there's some examples of wineries who are doing this. There's very few examples that I've worked with personally or visited personally, and I see them providing education opportunities for their farm workers. There's this one winery in Constantia, I guess, can I say the name? Constantia, where I know I'm saying it wrong. It's UTIG, STIG, whatever. But yeah, But they have a really great program where they offer these education programs to their employees, and it doesn't even have to be wine related. Like, they're encouraging them to take classes, to, you know, sign up for educational programs that are outside of their normal jobs. And they're like, if you find something that you like and you want to eventually leave the farm, we support that 100%. And then there's Bo Constantia, where they have a Black vineyard manager. I hope that they're paying him well, but the fact that they have a manager in, like, you know, a Black person in a management position like that means a lot to me. You know, I support things like that. They have a female winemaker. So, I mean, there's some good examples of things like that are going on, but then I know there's also some poor examples of people not treating their workers fairly. So, I mean, I just feel like the more we can highlight the good and the more we can work with the people who are doing these really great things. And like, PYDA is awesome. There's a lot of wineries that hire PYDA students, which I love the PYDA students. So, I mean, I feel like there's some good things that are happening, but we just need more of it.
Yes.
That's it.
Indeed. So, Natasha, in response to Jancis Robinson's piece, where I know your job title was out of date because you're now an independent consultant and not the winemaker at Nederburg, you brought up the following, and you said, we need to emphasize the importance of relevant and correct information via media platforms regarding diversity and transformation in the South African wine industry. And you also mentioned about, you know, who gets a voice and who gets to speak on behalf of whom is crucial. So I would like to invite you to elaborate on that.
It's like I said earlier as well. I think at the end of the day, the voice, yes, is important, but again, the knowledge that comes with the voice is also very crucial, and the right information. And when I say that, I always say to people, because there's a few things that I work with in agriculture space, a lot with the government body as well. And that is why I say you need to understand if you have a comment or when you say something in social media, because there's a lot of people, it is, unfortunately, it is sensitive issues, a sensitive subject to talk about. So the moment you raise these things in social media platform, or it's out there for everyone to read, it needs to be the correct, because there are some people that is learning from that, or makes comments from that. And I believe that at the end of the day, like my mom always used to say, the truth will set you free. And we're going to have to have the honest conversations. We're going to have to deal with the stuff we don't like. The narrative, which we are talking about here today. And so many times we rather don't want to talk about it. We're not comfortable to talk about it. And that is usually, I think, our greatest, I would say, weakness within this South African wine space, because we sometimes feel that I'm going to offend someone. And I do believe if we really want to look at diversity in a way, we're going to have to look at it, yes, with respectful, obviously, conversations we're going to have, but also respect everyone's view, because at the end of the day, diversity only happens when I respect your view, you're coming from, and you respect mine, and we come to a conclusion and actually try to work towards a common goal. And the common goal is to feel, for everyone to come into the room and feel that I belong. And I think that is the crucial reality we're sitting with the wine industry. We are too scared sometimes, and we don't want to tiptoe over certain things. But I do believe we should be the people that starts the conversations. We should be the diverse group that starts it, and not ignore what needs to be done.
As we have discussed outside the panel as well, the people whose opinions are included when speaking about issues that pertain to yourself, as opposed to the old anthropologists' approach of speaking about the people in another nation. And there are plenty of people in this industry who have the authority to comment. Nomonde, I'm interested to know, what are some of the specific barriers to entry that potential wine professionals face? And you can speak to us about this in terms of your own experiences and as well as the work that you're doing with the Academy.
Okay. Oh, in terms of my own experience, as a student studying at Stellenbosch University, I applied for the course. I didn't know anything about the university. And I found that most of my subjects would be in Afrikaans. So Afrikaans language is probably my third, fourth language. So first off, having to learn culture and oenology in a language I didn't thoroughly understand, didn't have a grasp for, was problematic. So we had to translate my notes to English before I could study for an exam. And when I later started working as well in where I worked, I mean, the company that I worked for at the time, I mean, I started in 2003, most people there work for Afrikaans speaking, from the seller assistants right to sort of top management. So that was a barrier. So when you have language, language is part of a culture, right? So that was tough to have challenge, but made it my business, personally made it my business to overcome that. Finances as well. So somebody might actually have a into the wine industry, being a winemaker, whatever. So sometimes you don't actually have the financial means to get an education. So that also becomes another hurdle. And people of color, Natasha spoke about sort of connections in some way. So you don't have necessarily the people you can call to say, listen, I need to do an internship or whatever. So we don't have those connections around in the wine industry. These are the things that I had to sort of work through. And as well, when you step into a room, let's say you go for tasting wine, judging wines, I would walk in personally and actually count how many people of color there. And I know that at that time I get so excited to be like, oh, okay, there's like 3 other people or 2 other people. So also fitting in was probably a theme for a long time. To shed over time to say, okay, fine, I don't fit in. And then after a while, I'm like, yes, I don't fit in. I was not meant to fit in, and that is okay, and actually work through that. So with so I mean, that's my background. But then as well, if I look at the students who come into the academy, also don't have access. Some of them don't have parents who have money, so finances are a big problem. In terms of access. But I think that's what we need, an opportunity. So the PYDA offers that opportunity that links matriculants to meaningful employment. And that's really the agenda, to get young South Africans employed in the industry. Not just meaningful, exposing them to other people, to lots of. I grew up, I didn't know there was a winemaker, so it's actually somebody who makes wine. But now even I've discovered all sorts of other career opportunities. So they've been exposed to that, sommeliers, winemaking, etc. And to expand their world. I've seen some instances where some of them live in the Western Cape and they've gone to the waterfront for the first time and they're so excited. And I'm thinking, wow, this is, the trip that I can do over a weekend, but they've never seen that. Some of them have to do fabulous things, working on cruise ship. So that opportunity is very, very, very important.
And on that note, I think, just to set the background for those who are listening in who may be unfamiliar, the demographics of this country are 80% Black, 90% in total people of color. And this is also a reason why these conversations, the conversation about diversity is so critical. It's so critical, and it is also at a place where it has become so urgent that changes are made. So while we observe a multitude of changes happening in the US for various reasons, at the moment we see it in media, we see it in wine, we see it in food, and we're also speaking about a Black population that is a minority, and a minority that has been actively assisted by white allies as well. And one cannot do the comparison game because we are in a completely different space for a multitude of reasons. But this is why I believe there need to be a lot more independent channels in which we can voice this and voice it ad nauseum if need be. Because I certainly feel that I am exhausted about, some of these conversations. Some of them seem to be so obvious because we have them amongst ourselves. But that, I think, in itself is the danger, because we have these conversations in silos and we are retweeted occasionally by the people who agree with us. And we have our friends sending us messages, did you read this? Did you see this? What happens beyond that? The time has come, I think, for everyone to be very uncomfortable, because it's in that discomfort, I think, that we're going to see some change. I would like to bring up the Bitter Grapes documentary. And it's a 2016 documentary by the Danish journalist Tom Heinemann. And it builds on the report of a 2011 report by Human Rights Watch. And in it, it details various human rights violations on some wine farms. It also details labor law violations. I think there was a payment of 100 Rand a day for 12-hour day. Currently, the rate is 20 Rand an hour. So that would mean for an 8-hour day, one would need to be paid a minimum of 160 Rand an hour. There's also, he also sets out how some people working with pesticides were not educated about how to use them and certainly not using any protective gear. There were some farmers who prevented unionizing, which we also know is a violation and illegal, actually. And a version of the DOP system. So for those who are unfamiliar with the DOP system, it's a system in which, that actually goes way back to the Dutch, where laborers, certainly in slave-like conditions, were paid in alcohol. And I believe continue to be paid in alcohol or alcohol to supplement their wages. So now I know this is really putting you on the spot, but this, Natasha, but I would like to know, does this, in your opinion, paint an accurate picture of the industry, of part of the industry, some of the industry?
I must say, I'll say part, not the whole of the industry, to be honest. I've worked in areas where I could see how people, obviously with the right, I'll say, format, are being paid with obviously a salary. But I've also been, in my short while consulting, I was exposed to a winery I used to work I'll say work with, and I decided to actually walk away from that contract based on it, because the guy actually started paying the people not anymore. People were living in harsh conditions on his farm. And when I started raising the issues, he asked me, but you're not the owner, so why do you feel the need to talk on behalf of them? And I said to them, I'm a person, when it comes to the wine industry, I believe in everyone is treated fairly. And at that stage, people weren't paid for close to 3 weeks. And if you have to look at the situations they were staying in, that was also one of the horrific sides for me, where some people's toilets was not working. And this was 2017. So for me, this is still true in some sort of way. And I do believe it's because we almost, again, like you mentioned, we sometimes almost want to wish it away, so we don't talk about it, we don't raise the facts, we don't look at it in detail and really ask, is this really true? Can we say as a South African wine industry, but we are not at fault here, or we are not, and I'm not saying all of it is true, there's people that's doing brilliant, obviously, initiatives. If I look at so many farms that I've also seen some of my friends work on, some of the people I know stay on, I know there's great initiatives. But the reality is true, there is some of those situations that still is existing currently in the wine industry. And I've seen it with my own eyes, because I was the person at that stage that needed to tell them, I don't agree with what you're doing at this moment. Now you're treating the people.
Thank you. And I also understand that a lot of people who want to comment or want to effect change can't, because unless you are independent, for whatever reason, you're independent with your own business, you rely so greatly on this network, as it happens in all industries, of food as well. And so I have seen, a reluctance over the years of people wanting to comment on record, but I've also seen that change. That usually it changes when people are in a more independent position. So I'm saying all of that to say this, that I appreciate your comment here. And I also know that it is difficult for some people who want to comment, but they can't do so on record. So we've touched on this just a little earlier about voice. And apart from a handful of successful winemakers who, we are extremely proud of and we celebrate, and I believe in the documentary, The Color of Wine, which I also watched recently, it sets out a lot of their achievements so beautifully. But it won't be that you find Black experts quoted, not in a hurry, on policy, on labor issues, distribution chains, systemic racism. And I'm asking a question that's a little unfair to answer, because how would you answer this? But why is it this way? Why is it this way? Is it that there's simply no Black voices with authority on these issues in wine? Or are we falling into a trap of replicating the old and using the same voices all the time? Why do you think this is? Natasha, you could also answer this.
I do believe, like I said earlier, there is Nomonde, there is Tuanni is actually in the space of South African, actually also a great, I would say, voice for South African wine industry. There's people, I see Natis in their house, even Tinashi, Ernest, I'm going to say Ernest, but there is some people of color that I do believe has voices that could be heard. But again, over and over, we've seen so many times only certain voices are being heard. And that is why I said earlier about the voice. It's time for us to not ignore those voices, because I think sometimes, with all due respect, again, yes, we are the majority in terms of a country. Maybe in numbers, we have people, again, working in the wine industry, and I've seen some of those quotes of 60% of people of color. The reality is, if it comes back to who's being heard, who are the people at the end of the day that they asked to comment on these things, on policies, on dialogue, on who sits on the boards of the industry bodies, who is in decision-making power and positions of influence, who are those people? And that is the type of, to be honest, that's the information I'm after, because that is the true reality, and that is what we're going to start to have to dissect in order for us to see true diversity. Because we almost steer away from it and we almost don't want to dig into it because it is uncomfortable, like you said.
Nomonde, would you be in a position to comment here about the experts that are quoted or not quoted, or if there is more space to include Black voices, but it's not being done?
Really, are we being asked these questions? Or is it just a conversation that happens, and whoever maybe has sort of in the industry for the longest, it's like expert or whatever. But in some cases, in most cases, really, it's very rare that those questions raised and people of color are invited to listen. These are the questions. What are your thoughts? Your opinions. So that's why we hear sort of the same voices, maybe as well, besides being asked, maybe also we haven't created to actually have our voices heard. Because it's one thing when you're also invited to the table, sometimes it's a different picture when you actually have that table and you. I think it's a bit of and
Yeah.
it will be our responsibility then to do that.
Yes. And of course, this is not to take away from the great work that is being done, first of all, by the Academy and networks like Black, the Black Cellar Club. The thing that we don't always appreciate from the outside is that networks like the Black Cellar Club require admin support, require funding, and I know that it's not, as far as I know, Black has not yet registered as an NPO, and trying to go down that process with SAPOC at the table, I know it's arduous, and you're often stuck in a position where you can't accept funds, you can't receive funds, and without this, you can't pay someone to assist you, and it's a lot of work that needs to be done. So I think the intentions perhaps in the industry, certainly from people of color, may be there, but it is another thing getting that off the ground and mobilizing. And Sure, one can create free WordPress websites, etc. But the bottom line is to mobilize efficiently, one needs funds and one needs people with time to do that. And I know that, Tuanni, you have been tasked with doing quite a bit of the social media for Black. Can you tell us a little bit of what you think Black has achieved in the industry and what's going on there?
So I volunteer for Black, and I also volunteer for PYDA, and I feel like Black is a great platform, and it's a great resource for people to further their education in the industry and their networking in the industry. So it's there. I think that Black is a great platform for that, and but it's only as good as you make it, right? And so, like, I feel like diversity is good, and that's where it's kind of like we need, like Natasha was saying, we don't have people who own land or who worked in the industry for years to pass down knowledge, right? So we have to depend on each other and we have to mentor each other. And I think that, Tinashe is on the board for Black, and he does a really good job of mentoring when he can, when people reach out. But how many people are actually reaching out because they don't know? It's like you know what you know. And so Black is there, and there's so much, like, I have a Black study group that I host twice a week, and it's such a good resource, right? And there's hundreds of people in Black, but we have about 20 people on the call. So you would think that more people would take advantage of that resource, because we have we have Andrea's on the call. Andrea was one of our guest speakers. And so we've had some really amazing guest speakers on that platform. And so I just think that, I'm a proponent of self-help as well, right? Because this road to diversity, it's not something that you can say, you know what, please give this to me, give this to me. It's something that you actually have to say, you know what, I want to do this. I want to have my own business, and I want to take steps to further my career. And how do you do that? And you do that by joining groups like Black and participating. You do that by, finishing PYDA, and then after you finish PYDA, doing interns and getting jobs and things like that. So some resources are there, but it's also up to Black people to take advantage of those resources. And I don't mean to blame the victim either. That's not what I'm doing either, because I definitely feel like doors should be open, and there's not enough doors and opportunities open. But at the same time, I think that being prepared for those doors and opportunities is important, and there are good resources like Black, and
Right.
people, if that makes sense. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. Thank you for sharing that. You also covered some things that I wanted to touch on earlier, and that was, coming into this, not having the certain language, not having, the certain experiences. And someone brought up something earlier in the chat, which I thought was interesting. It was Lindiwe, who said, is land ownership the stumbling block to potentially increasing opportunities in the winemaking industry? I mean, would anyone like to just take that one quickly?
I think looking at land ownership, there's such a heated debate around, sorry to say the phrase, take back the land and all those things. But again, like I said earlier, we're gonna have to understand the policy. We're gonna have to understand what actually is behind that. Because when it comes to, I don't think it necessarily has a direct effect, with all due respect, when it comes to, if you look at the opportunities within the wine industry. What I do believe, yes, it might have an effect on how people look at agriculture, if I can put it like that directly, because that is the other part of it. But in the wine space, I believe there's other ways. When I spoke about the value chain earlier and about the links, I do believe there's other ways you can acquire how can I say, wealth within the industry, but it is dependent not necessarily on the access to land. It is one of the factors, yes, but it is not necessarily the only factor. If you have the land, the question is, how are you going to work the land? The question is, how are you going to get funding for working the land?
Oh, I think she might be frozen.
Oh.
Yeah, but Natasha and I have this conversation all the time. So, like, even if they gave if they gave Natasha a plot of land right now, like, does she have the capital to actually open up a functioning wine farm, tasting room, and cellar? So, like, land ownership is one thing, but then also having capital is another, is a whole nother beast of its own. I think Natasha would say that, because we have this conversation all the time.
Are you still frozen, Natasha?
Yeah, she's still frozen.
Okay. All right. So, you know, on that matter of ownership, and we often speak about if we had more people of color in a room, certain things that we see happening often in the media wouldn't happen. You know, whether it's Bon Appetit's fur video from many years ago to, I think, recently the All Wines Matter. That was, I think it was a former rugby player, and I can't remember the name of the wine farm, but they did this. And of course, you know, I just want to say this, La Boucher, that's what Eric reminds me there. I want to say my observation is that if that happened a year ago, 2 years ago, I honestly cannot have seen South African wine Twitter the way I know it, taking that down or having an issue or not coming up with excuses about why it's okay. But in the current climate in which we are in, you know, there's been an enormous, it's a revolution. It's a cultural and political shift that is global, and it's exciting. I mean, it's a lot of things, but I see that having happened in this climate, but a year ago or 2 years ago, someone getting away with something like that. But anyone would like to comment, because the question or the comment that is often made is that if there were people of color on your team, in your PR, marketing, it would make sense that if they were allowed to vet, they wouldn't allow certain things to go through. They wouldn't allow certain things that, you know, we do, that are displayed as casual racism or, you know, insensitive.
Yeah, I think that I'd like to comment on that, because, like, with everything going on in America and then the changes that are happening in the Court of Master Sommeliers, one particular example was one student in the court, how she said that when she sat for her master's, she had to refer to the person leading the class as master. So you'd have to say master and then their last name. So you'd say Master Price. And I know for African Americans, calling someone master it's culturally, it's like, it's not going to happen. I mean, if it does happen, it's a lot. And so if they had somebody on the board for years or a long time ago, somebody could have, that was, you know, Black, they could have said, you know what, that's not really, you know, we should keep it Master Sommelier Price, because calling somebody Master Price it's unacceptable. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But when you don't have people of color on the boards or in higher management positions to add that cultural perspective, then you have these insensitive things that happen. So and that's why diversity is so important as well, because then you have perspectives from all sides of everything. I know when I volunteered for PYDA, even me coming from America, we went on a trip once and the students were late, and I was like, this is unacceptable. They have to be here on time. And then one person, they told me, they said, Tuanni, you don't understand how transportation is such a big deal in South Africa, right? So culturally, I didn't understand why the students couldn't get there on time, but then I didn't know where they were coming from. So it wasn't until I said, you know what, let me take a train to Paro to see, or Wellington, wherever it was, to see what it's actually like taking a train from one place to another place, to see how difficult it is. And then when I did that, I got to see like how long it takes, what are some of the challenges, and then I was able to relate. But imagine you sit on a board and you have to make decisions for people's livelihood, but you've never even walked in their shoes. You don't even know what they're going through on a day-to-day basis, you know? So that's why having different people on boards and in upper management is so important.
And the thing is, I mean, empathy goes a long way, of course, and there are, you know, many people who understand the difficulties and who act as true allies, but there really is a difference between empathy and understanding the lived experience. Natasha, I don't know, I believe you may be back.
I am back, sorry about that.
I mean, so we're rounding off now, and I see there are a couple of things I would have loved us to get to, but we're not going to have time for all of that, as I knew would be the case. So we were just speaking about, having people representative on in an association or an institution, and that sort of value, what they would bring. So I don't know if you would like to comment on that as well.
I think earlier I have mentioned as well, I think there is a lot of currently when it comes to these industry bodies, it is important for us to be able, because like Tuanni just said, I've listened a bit to what she said about understanding, having empathy, because sometimes people sitting maybe on those, where it is the decision-making power or influencing power, might not have the background of someone who has, for instance, struggled with traveling with a train to get to class or having to have public transport. So when things are being, how can I say, when certain decisions need to be made within those spaces about how we're going to have, for instance, requirements when it goes to certain criteria of things that we need to be for transformation to have diversity, these are the type of voices that can add value to those conversations. And how do you put up the requirements for you to be able to actually either get the funding or be part of the system or be part of the, I would say, the value chain, because that is where I think it is important to have diverse conversation at the end of the day around those tables.
And also to clarify, because you and I had chatted about this a few days ago, and that was about the All Wines Matter thing, and how this could be put out and could be put out with what I imagine was good conscience initially, before it was retracted. So now, in our final minutes, I'm going to have a look at some of the comments on the chat, and if there's a specific question here, maybe I'm just going to put it through to you. So there was a question from Fiona, and she says, do you think there are more women pressing for change because women are better at networking and supporting each other? Now, I just want to say that in the majority of these panels, it just so happens that we've had almost all women panels, and that was a combination of a conscious decision as well. But that is not to say that we don't have men in this industry, men of color, who are also doing the work. Would someone like to comment on that? Nomonde, maybe?
What's the question again, sorry?
So it was, do you think that women are better at, or, well, I think the question in summary was, do you think that the support between women in the industry sort of allows for change? So in other words, more women are pressing for change because women are better at networking and supporting each other.
I think women in most cases, they have this other ability to see sort of the broader picture, all right? Not only about themselves, so maybe that's why that is the case in pressing for change, because we realize that it's not only about us from a personal perspective, but we think about how everybody else would benefit, so to speak. So maybe that is the case. I would like at some stage a guy's opinion on that as well.
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of men that are, women tend to be a lot more vocal. We like to talk. We like to chat, right? We like to get on these platforms and talk it all out, right? But I think that change is not only having these conversations, change is also like what you're doing in the background. And I think that there's a lot of men of color who are doing things in the background to make a change and to change the platform and the landscape of diversity. I know Joseph and his crew, they do a lot of mentorships. They do a lot of networking and helping each other out in the community. So I think that they're here. They're just not on this call.
Yeah.
They're doing their part.
Yeah.
I agree with you, Tuanni and Nomonde. I do believe there's great guys out here doing a lot of work. Even Denzel, I'm thinking about Swartz at Simon's, and the ways works with the youth in general, just to open doors for them. And like I said, I just think, unfortunately, they're not on this call, but there is people, when it comes to generalizing, I think it is a bit generalized, to be honest. But I do believe it's not that we're wanting to push, or I have conversations with them, the same conversations that I'm having with Tuanni. I just think, like Tuanni says, we are usually human beings that tend to talk upfront and let our voice be heard sometimes more than in this instances.
Yeah.
Tinashe had a question on the chat, and I just wanted to address his question.
Yeah.
And he basically wanted to know, is there a huge demand in general for Black-owned wine brands, right? For consumers, for Black-owned wine brands. And when you talk about diversity, this is something that I struggle with as well, because I try to promote brands that are made by Black people whenever I can. And that doesn't mean that I don't drink everything, because I definitely drink everything. But the reason that I try to promote these brands is because they don't have a voice, right? And I think that when people are making their wine decisions, they should make their decision based on, is it a Black-owned brand, or is it a white-owned brand, or if it's a woman-owned brand, they should make a decision based on if it's a good wine. However, like me personally, I dedicate 25% of my budget, my wine budget, only 25% of my wine budget that I spend specifically to brands that are made by women or Black people. And I do this because when you think about the shelves in the grocery store, they're all white-owned. You can go and you can spend your money with white-owned brands without a problem, without even thinking about it. So you definitely have to just make a conscious decision. And I think there is a market. I think there's a market for wines that have a story. And usually these Black wine brands, they have a story behind them. So my question would be, how do you change it so that you're not saying, okay, this is the section for Black-owned brands, this is the section for wine, and we're going to buy this wine, but you still ensure that you're spending at least 25% of your budget with these brands.
Yeah.
So there is a market for it, Tinashe, for sure.
Yes. And I think, of course, the ultimate criteria is obviously that is the wine good? And you know, do I want more of it? And I think it goes without saying when we think about Tinashe's wines, Joseph's wines, Nsiki's wines, they're excellent. And I just think because of the historical, you know, lack of marketing, lack of knowledge, it isn't that one is saying, drink this wine, it is Black owned. Drink this wine, it's exceptional. And by the way, it's Black owned. I think the decision from the consumer, certainly those of us who are in the industry, needs to be a conscious decision. And it's not, unfortunately, going to happen, in my opinion, organically. It's certainly not going to be a natural rollout where we wait for 50 years and we're all on the same playing field. I think if anything, there needs to be a lot of thought put behind the decisions we make in supporting Black wine businesses, Black experts, Black professionals. So on that note, I know there's a lot more that we would like to discuss on the issue of diversity, and this has probably given us some ideas for further panels as well. Thank you so much for joining us. Please have a look at our website, sapocathetable.com, and you can follow us on Instagram, that's sapoctable, on Twitter, sapoct. Give us some feedback if you have any ideas. If you'd like any one of these panelists specifically to address an issue in a future panel, let us know. Thank you so much for your time, Tuanni, Nomonde, and Natasha, and have a great afternoon. Bye.
Bye-bye.